do those in charge truly care about our well-being? Can we ever truly trust them? While getting too conspiratorial has its own set of problems, I think it's also important to remember not to be too trusting. As this list shows, government cover-ups have been known to happen, and these are all fairly recent. Today, we're talking about some of the creepiest government cover-ups in recent history. And we're starting off the list with Project Sunshine. Such a pleasant sounding name for such an eerie project. That juxtaposition just makes the whole thing even creepier. I like to call this the Frankenstein experiment because this study involved grave robbing. So it was carried out in secret by the government, which is insane. Starting in 1953, the United States Atomic Energy Commission carried out a series of studies on the effects of radioactive fallout. But in order to look at the effects of radioactive material on the human body, now thankfully they did not decide to snatch up a bunch of living people, but they did end up using a bunch of non-living samples. The problem was the families of the dead were never told about this, and of course never consented. In 1955, the commissioner of the United States Atomic Energy Commission, Dr. Willard Libby, spoke about the need for human remains to be used in studies on radiation, and was quoted saying, "I don't know how to get them, but I do say that it is a matter of prime importance to get them, and particularly in the young age group. So human samples are often of prime importance, and if anybody knows how to do a good job of body snatching, they will really be serving their country." Yikes. Next on the list, Tuskegee Syphilis Study. So this was a long-running study beginning in 1932 all the way up until 1972, and considering what was going on here, it's pretty sickening it went on as long as it did. So this study focused on the effects of untreated syphilis in black men. Initially, it involved around 600 men. 400 of these guys had syphilis and 200 didn't. All of them were misled about the study's true purpose though. They were told that they were receiving free healthcare and burial insurance in exchange for their participation in the study, but the 400 men with syphilis weren't told they had it. The term bad blood was used to describe their condition, which was a local term that was just kind of vague, not referring to any specific condition. And these 400 men were given placebos just to maintain the guise of actually being treated in the study. And if this isn't all infuriating enough, even when an actual cure for syphilis became available in the form of penicillin in the 40s, the researchers intentionally withheld the treatment from the participants. So many of these guys suffered severe health problems, heart disease, blindness, and death. By the end of this quote-unquote study, which went on for 40 years, 28 patients died directly from syphilis, 100 died from complications. But that wasn't the only unethical study the US government carried out involving syphilis. There was also the Guatemala syphilis experiments, and this one may be even more shocking, if you can even believe that. So these experiments were carried out in Guatemala between 1946 and 48. It was to study the effects of syphilis, gonorrhea, and cankeroids, and testing the effectiveness of penicillin as a treatment. So there were about 1,300 Guatemalans involved in these experiments. Included in this group were prisoners, mental health patients, and even orphans. And no, the participants were not informed about the true nature of these experiments. Many were deliberately infected with syphilis without their knowledge or consent. In some cases, the researchers exposed participants to syphilis by allowing them to have contact with an infected individual. You can imagine what that contact was. In other instances, they directly inoculated participants with bacteria. Once they were infected, they would attempt to treat the subjects with penicillin, but not all participants were treated. By 1953, 83 of these unwitting participants died. Next up, we have the horrors carried out in Unit 731, a covert biological and chemical warfare research and development unit of the Imperial Japanese Army. It was active from 1937 to 1945. There were brutal human experiments carried out on a large scale. 200,000 to 300,000 people died as a result of these experiments. I mean, even calling what went on here experimentation is a stretch. This was basically just pure torment. Unit 731's goal was to develop biological and chemical weapons, and they were testing the effects of various pathogens and toxins on the human body. So they tested this stuff mostly on Chinese prisoners of war. Inhumane, but not all that surprising. What is more surprising, though, is that even civilians were used as fodder. These experiments involved exposing people to deadly diseases like the bubonic plague and anthrax. Victims were also dissected while awake. There were frostbite studies where victims were forced to stand out in the freezing cold until they got frostbite. It was just complete and utter madness, and what went on here didn't become known until after World War II. And here's another super messed up thing. In exchange for their research data, a lot of the researchers of Unit 731 were pardoned for their war crimes by the United States as part of a secret deal. Ever have that feeling like Big Brother is watching you? Well, with the internet, I think people are more paranoid about this than ever, but Operation Chaos has become one of the most infamous cases of government overreach when it comes to surveillance. So this was a covert program carried out by the CIA to monitor and gather intelligence on domestic descendant groups who were opposed to the Vietnam War. This was not a popular war, and the US government was concerned that there were foreign influences fueling the anti-war movement at the time. The CIA set out to collect information on anti-war activists, student groups, and anyone else really that they believed might have had connections to foreign governments or were influenced by communist ideology. The CIA conducted surveillance, they gathered intelligence, and they compiled dossiers on thousands of US citizens. They were secretly monitoring people's activities, collecting information on their personal lives. Undercover agents would also infiltrate anti-war groups to gather info from within the organizations they were monitoring. Now, whatever your political views are, this whole thing was clearly a violation of people's privacy. Very un-American, at least in the rose-tinted glasses ideal of what America was supposed to be. Now, there's a lot of United States on this list, but Canada, we're not innocent either. There's been some incredibly dark stuff that's gone on here, mostly relating to the Indigenous population. Residential schools in Canada were institutions Aboriginals were forced into with the aim of assimilating them, ridding them of their own culture, their language, and traditions into a more Western way of life. Now, you might think these schools were just a thing of the past, but the last one closed in 1996. They began operating in 1831, forcibly separating families. The Canadian government, in partnership with various religious groups, primarily the Catholic Church, established and operated these places, and most of what was going on here was unknown to the public, downplayed, or just not discussed. And the silence and lack of transparency really allowed for incredibly harmful practices to go on for a very long time. It's something that hasn't even been fully remedied to this day. Next on the list are the Terrordrome experiments. Holmesburg Prison in Philadelphia became notorious for experiments carried out by a complete mad scientist named Dr. Albert Kligman, who had a total lack of regard for human life. Dr. Albert Kligman was a dermatologist who carried out a range of very dangerous scientific tests on the inmates living in what became known as the Terrordrome, thanks to this doctor. Now, in the case of these studies, the inmates, in a sense, volunteered for these experiments, but it wasn't out of a genuine willingness to participate. Many of them were in desperate situations and saw the experiments as a way to earn some, small amounts of money. They were then subjected to a variety of experiments that can only be categorized as inhumane. He exposed them to microwave radiation, infected them with skin diseases, and conducted biochemical experiments on them, including exposing them to dioxin, which is a toxic substance that was used in Agent Orange. And when I say Kligman had a complete lack of care about these men's lives, I mean he literally saw them as inhuman. He famously said that all he saw when he entered the prison grounds for the first time was, quote, acres of skin, like a farmer seeing a fertile field for the first time, end quote. All the guy saw was raw material. It's pretty disturbing. Now we move on over to Sweden with the Vipholm experiments. This study happened in Sweden from 1947 to about 1949. The purpose of it was to study the effects of sugar on teeth, but their way of going about it was completely unethical. In Vipholm Hospital in Lund, Sweden, mentally disabled patients were used as the subjects for the study. They were given excessive amounts of sugary foods like candy, chocolate, and toffees to observe the impact it would have on their teeth. Were vulnerable people. They weren't able to give proper informed consent here. They were used as subjects in a study without having a clear understanding of the risks involved. And yeah, surprise, surprise, but a lot of the participants' teeth became severely damaged. And the results of the tests weren't even made public till years and years later because the confectionery industry was helping sponsor it, and they weren't too pleased with the results. So they tried to just subdue the whole thing. So what happened to these poor people was kept a secret for decades. Next up, we have toxic waste in Area 51. So we don't know exactly what was going on here because it's Area 51. But there were employees who came out in the 90s saying they'd suffered because of some of the practices going on at the base. A number of Area 51 workers actually took the facility to court when they started developing all kinds of illnesses after exposure to hazardous material. The government had dumped a whole bunch of discarded hazardous waste into trenches the length of apparently football fields, and then would set them on fire. So there was just this toxic smoke that would fill the air, which became known as London fog by the workers. After long exposure to this stuff, many staff began developing serious illnesses later on in life, like horrible skin rashes, which they referred to as fish scales. They were like kind of hard membranes that would form in the arms, the hands, the legs, and their feet, and sometimes they would just use sandpaper to remove it. And many would also develop cancer and other respiratory illnesses. And because the workers weren't allowed to disclose anything about what was going on at the base, they had a very difficult time receiving proper medical care. But the big question is here, like, what was in that toxic waste? And finally, we have the infamous MKUltra. This sounds like something from a conspiracy thriller, if that's even a real genre. I think you know what I mean though. But this was really a thing that happened. MKUltra was a secretive program carried out by the CIA in the 50s and 60s. And the goal was to explore mind control techniques and methods of altering human behavior. But a whole long list of messed up experiments were used. There was a big focus on illicit substances, mainly LSD, to study their potential for mind control and use in interrogations. Basically, they were trying to find substances that could manipulate a person's thoughts, emotions, and actions. They'd also employ psychological torment, like sensory deprivation and isolation. Some subjects were even the victims of SA. Most of these test subjects had no idea what they were actually in for. Some didn't even know they were part of experiments at all. This was being done all on the hush-hush. It wasn't until 1975 that the whole thing was finally exposed to the public. The majority of the files on MKUltra had been destroyed in 1973 though, so sworn testimonies from participants were pretty much all the prosecution had to rely on. Just so you know, the government is staging an alien invasion to screw over the working class in favor of a new world order.
And it's called Project Bluebeam. The manipulation of the public leading to a one world order might be coming sooner than we think, and it might already be in the works, in the form of a top secret elite global manipulation plan called Project Bluebeam. The theory was brought forth in 1994 when Serge Monast claimed that NASA and the UN had been working on a 4-stage project that would turn the world completely on its head and result in the elite class becoming the overall ruling class of the entire globe. How? fear-mongering. In order to carry out Project Bluebeam, the world leaders will utilize holograms to fake cataclysmic events such as volcanic eruptions, earthquakes, alien invasions, and even the rapture, all while projecting religious symbols into the sky. This would destroy the public's faith in science, leading us to turn elsewhere for answers and guidance, which, of course, is when the elites would step in.
Let's talk a little bit more about this guy behind Project Bluebeam. It's a man named Serge Monast, or was, because he's dead now, but Serge Monast was a Canadian journalist born in 1945. He wrote several books and articles claiming that powerful global elites were plotting to establish a new world order by using advanced technology and psychological manipulation. In the mid-90s, Monast began getting some attention for his Project Bluebeam theory. He claimed that NASA and the United Nations were behind a plot to create a false second coming of Christ and other religious figures using holograms and mind control. More on that later. Now, according to Monast, this was meant to trick people into accepting a single world government and abandoning their traditional religions. He thought this was going to happen several different times throughout history. It hasn't yet. Monast also believed that the government was already testing some of these mind control techniques and technologies on the public. He died in 1996 at the age of 51 of a heart attack, but his supporters think his death was suspicious, possibly linked to his work in exposing Project Bluebeam. I mean, how was this 51-year-old man who looked like he was 70 not a pinnacle of health?
If you are watching this on a computer, tablet, phone, or TV, I've got some bad news. You're probably being brainwashed right now. That's right, not only is Project Bluebeam using holograms to instill fear into and influence the public, they are also using subliminal messaging, interrupting television broadcasts and other forms of consumable entertainment in the hopes that eventually they will be able to cause the masses to hallucinate the second coming of Christ. If Jesus is standing in your living room right now, you might want to take a break from electronics for a while. If not, listen up. Confusion and fascination over the impending end of the world is exactly what the elites want, because it makes it easier for them to unite the world under a single leader, one that they have chosen to govern in such a way that it suits only their own best interests. I'd say keep your guard up, but if you're already stressing about the end of days, I fear it might be too late.
So a lot of what this conspiracy revolves around is this rise of a new world order centered around a single religion that spreads across the globe, then indoctrinating everyone and usurping current religions, mainly Christianity and Islam. The concept is that this is going to happen in steps. So step one is said to involve faking earthquakes in different parts of the world to create fake archaeological discoveries that'll be churned up in the rubble. These discoveries will then be used to challenge and undermine religious beliefs, discrediting religions by presenting so-called new evidence that supposedly contradicts their teachings. So there's just a lot about this that makes zero sense. First of all, how are you gonna fake huge natural disasters without having, victims? You'd have to have people living in a full-on Matrix simulation in order for that to work. Plus, religious beliefs are deeply ingrained and they're not easily swayed by new evidence alone. And new archaeological evidence, and that's being discovered all the time, and half the population just doesn't care and goes on believing what they want to anyway. Theological beliefs are not based solely on observable facts. They're based on faith. That's kind of the whole point. So the idea that archaeological findings, even if faked, just could usurp the very foundations of established religion overnight, that's just, I don't know, that's insanity.
Is it though? Because in February of 2023, the United States military took down 4 mystery objects flying in the skies above the US and Canada. While one of the objects was identified as a Chinese spy balloon, the other 3 remain a mystery. Of course, the natural response of the public was to claim that the objects were alien spacecrafts, which I'm starting to believe is exactly what the government wanted. Why else would they make such a show out of the whole thing, but only release one statement saying that the object taken out was a reasonable threat to civilian flight? The whole thing just seems too vague to be real, which points to the objects being a hologram and the retrieval of the objects being a hoax. What is starting to seem more and more real the more we discuss it, though, is Project Bluebeam.
Alright, step 2 of the rise of the New World Order involves the coolest light show you're ever gonna see. I mean, just get ready. You may as well just cancel your trip to Disney World. Here there will be a massive holographic space show, or various light shows across the globe using advanced technology to project 3D holograms depicting whatever the most popular god is in the region. So some of us will see Jesus, others would see Muhammad. These projections will also be made to speak various languages, of course. Gotta make sure everyone understands the message. At the climax of this incredible light show, the holographic figures of these different gods will supposedly then merge into one, representing the Antichrist, a figure opposed to the traditional religious beliefs and the one true God that the evil New World Order is trying to control us all with. I'm not really sure how this is supposed to work on the blind. Well, I guess we'll just have to take everyone's word for it.
If Project Bluebeam really does exist, which it probably does, is Bob Lazar in on it? You guys remember Bob Lazar, right? The guy who supposedly risked his life to reveal the secrets of Area 51 to the world. Secrets like at one time there were 4 legitimate alien spacecrafts residing on the base that ran on element 115, aka Moscovium. Well, now I'm starting to wonder if the government threatened to kill him over his statement, or if they paid him to say it in the first place. I mean, what better way to get the public to believe in aliens than have it come from someone they trust, someone speaking out against the government. I mean, after Snowden, whistleblowers practically became one of the most publicly trusted news sources out there, but now I'm not so sure, because if the government really is trying to instill fear into the eyes of the public through brainwashing them into believing an alien invasion is going to wipe out the earth, what better way to do it than with a guy like Bob Lazar? Because I kind of believed Bob Lazar, but now I'm thinking, was that a mistake?
Alright, on to step 3 of the New World Order rollout plan: control through telepathy, or at least that's what you'll be made to believe. So step 3 involves making people believe their god is speaking directly to them through telepathy. The idea is to use extreme low frequency radio waves to project these thoughts into each person's mind individually, making them think they're hearing divine messages, which will obviously be done to keep people in line following the will of the rulers of the New World. Not sure how this is supposed to work on the deaf. I have a lot of other questions as well though. How is each and every person gonna receive the attention they deserve, you know, through these low frequency commands? I mean, you gotta have to be pretty specific with them if you really want people to believe that it's God who's talking to them. A one-size-fits-all approach, I don't think that's gonna work here. So this small 1% of elites is gonna somehow find the time to send these specific messages to all their underlings down below. Even if they had access to everyone's names and jobs and stuff, like how are they gonna bring up all this personal stuff about you that only a god would know?
Are aliens a cover-up for Project Bluebeam, or is Project Bluebeam a cover-up for aliens? This is the dilemma that I'm currently facing, and I'm sure many of you are too, because if the government can fake an alien invasion to cover up a plan to take over the world, why can't they also spread one world propaganda to cover up the fact that aliens exist? Like, it's entirely possible that the reason for this whole blue beam discourse is so we get off the backs of the government so that they can go about their unethical and environmentally detrimental alien experimentations in peace. I mean, maybe they're already working with the aliens so that the elites don't create a one world order here, but so that they can head off to another planet once they destroyed this one, leaving us all to crash and burn. I'm just saying, if you don't see me in the next video, assume I got it right.
And of course, the whole thing ends with the rapture, the final takeover of a single world power. Step 4 of Project Bluebeam is the most outlandish part of the whole plan. It involves making people believe that an alien invasion is happening. The government's been creating and testing UFOs for this very reason, mind you. Next, everyone will be convinced that the rapture is starting, and finally, using some mix of electronic and supernatural forces, microchips will be activated in all consumer electronics and appliances, which have been, of course, pre-planted. After this, chaos will erupt and people will be scared and desperate enough to finally accept a new world order. After this, according to Monist, everyone will sign their souls away to Lucifer and officially enter the new world order. Those still clinging to their former religions will then be kept as slaves. It's really not that hard to see what this dude is trying to accomplish with this conspiracy theory. Yeah, it's a lot of
Project Serpo, a secret government exchange program with extraterrestrial beings.
Did astronauts visit a distant planet and interact with alien beings? And are they still in cahoots with the government to this day?
A top secret exchange program between the United States government and planet Serpo, located in the Zeta Reticuli star system, aka the planet of the short grays. The project was allegedly created under the administration of President John F. Kennedy after the US government saved the life of an alien, EVA-1, who crash landed on Earth back in 1947. Entirely grateful and forever indebted to humanity, the alien began working with the US government and teaching them about his home planet, Serpo. When EVA-1 died, he left behind communications technology which the government then used to eventually get into contact with other Serpo natives. That is when the government made arrangements to send 12 specially trained astronauts to planet Serpo so that they may learn about life outside of our atmosphere. In order to reach Serpo, the 12 astronauts had to travel through a wormhole, after which the majority of them got sick and one unfortunately died of an aneurysm. But of course they kept going and eventually they reached the alien planet. For a decade they studied life on Serpo before returning home and assuming entirely new identities in order to protect the security of the mission. Fair enough, I suppose.
So what are the origins of this Project Serpo tale? Well, like with most conspiracies in the modern age, it started gaining popularity online and took off from there. It all started in 2005 when a series of anonymous emails began circulating among UFO researchers and enthusiasts. These emails, which were allegedly from a retired US government official who remained anonymous, laid out this insane story about an extraterrestrial exchange program. We'll talk more about this anonymous individual later. The Project Serpo story started making the rounds way faster than these types of stories would have back in the day. It was 2005, the internet was still relatively new, in the grand scheme of things anyway, and the UFO community was just hungry for new, sensational stories. And this one, it's pretty much the definition of sensational.
Remember that alien that I mentioned, EVA-1, that crash landed to Earth in 1947? Yeah, well that was actually the Roswell incident of 1947, and also the first time the US government supposedly made contact with aliens. As many of you are probably already aware, in 1947 an unidentified object crash landed on some farmland in Roswell, New Mexico. When Area 51 was alerted of the incident, they rushed to the scene, collected the object, and released a statement saying that what had come spiraling down to Earth a few nights prior was nothing more than a weather balloon. But then they sent the object out to another base for testing, and another, and another. Why? Well, because it wasn't actually a weather balloon. It was an alien spacecraft containing 6 aliens, 5 of which had died in the crash, and one of which came to be known as Extraterrestrial Biological Entity Number 1, or EVA-1. EVA-1 was taken to the Air Force facility in Los Alamos, where he stayed until his death in 1952. During this time, he learned to communicate with the military and told them some pretty interesting things.
Now, if the US government is really working with these alien beings, where might they be carrying out their activities? Area 51? Some hidden base in Antarctica? Well, some say they could be operating from an even more top secret place. Dulce Base. Dulce Base supposedly sits deep beneath the Colorado-New Mexico border, close to Dulce, New Mexico. Dulce Base is said to be a secret facility where humans and aliens are working together, exchanging ideas and doing all sorts of experiments. Multiple levels deep underground with high-tech labs. The rumors are that different alien species, from the Greys, from planet Serpo possibly, to the reptilians, are working hand in hand with the US government. As to what they're trying to accomplish, probably something really fun and good that we don't really need to bother worrying about. Stories about this place really started coming about from a man named Paul Benowitz, who claimed to have discovered an underground base near Dulce full of gray aliens and humans. His claims caught a lot of attention, but Benowitz's mental health eventually declined and he ended up in a mental hospital, passed away in 2003. And there's always been this rumor that he was part of a big, widespread misinformation campaign.
As I said, during EVA-1's time on Earth, he informed the US government of quite a few things. One being that Serpo natives, Ebans as they are referred to by humans, had actually been visiting Earth for the last 2,000 years with no issue, but but unfortunately this time new Earth radar technology that they don't have on Sorpo caused the ship to go haywire and crash, killing the majority of the crew. In 1949, a similar thing happened. 6 Ebens crash landed, but this time unfortunately none of them made it. When the ship was examined, the military found a communications device, which they worked on with EBA-1 to repair. They got it working and sent out multiple distress signals, but it wasn't until after EBA-1's death in 1952 that they finally got a reply. Communications began between the US military and the Ebens. It took a while, but eventually they were able to understand one another. After learning about the 12 deceased Ebens stranded on Earth, the Ebens asked if they could come to Earth and retrieve the bodies. Of course, the military wanted something in return, so they came up with the exchange program. The military wanted tech, but the Ebens said, no, you're not ready for our tech. And so they proposed something else. In exchange for the bodies of their deceased, 12 astronauts could spend a decade on planet Serpo. Furthermore, an Eben would stay on Earth to assist the military. In 1964, the Ebens landed on Earth once again to retrieve the bodies, and Project Sorpo, aka Project Crystal Knight, as it has also been called, commenced.
The star system where these aliens are supposedly from has been at the center of some of the most famous alien abduction stories in history, including the Barney and Betty Hill abduction. Were these beings from Serpo, Ebens, or Greys, as they're typically called, responsible for abductions like this? The Barney and Betty Hill case is pretty interesting. In September of 1961, this American couple was driving through rural New Hampshire at night when they noticed strange lights in the sky that seemed to be tracking their car's movements. Barney decided to stop the car to get out and have a look, and what he allegedly saw were humanoid figures peering out from a hovering craft. The Hills peeled off as fast as they could, but they later realized they'd lost a pretty hefty chunk of time that they just didn't remember. But as the days passed, they started to remember things. They ended up reporting being taken aboard a UFO where they were subjected to medical examinations by beings described as small, with gray skin, oversized eyes, and tiny little anime mouths, which is that's the exact way they described it back then. It's a 60s term, anime mouths. Their account was one of the earliest descriptions of the now iconic image of your classic gray alien.
Of course, a regular mission to space is no walk in the park, but a mission to a faraway planet located in a star system entirely separate from our own, that's tough. And apparently so was the training process. It took an entire year of survival, escape, evasions, weapons, and psychological training for the 12 astronauts to become fully prepared for their mission. The crew consisted of scientists, linguists, pilots, 2 doctors, and a security officer. Over the course of a year, along with the standard training, one by one, each member of the crew was buried in a 6 by 5 foot box and kept there for 5 days. As part of a training intensive, there was no light, no communication, just a small air hole that allowed the astronauts to receive food and water and not suffocate to death. It was tough, but they all passed, and the pilots even went on to learn how to operate alien spacecrafts. When it came time to take off, the 12 astronauts, along with 40 tons of gear, which included 10 motorcycles and 3 jeeps, were loaded into the spacecraft using anti-gravity technology, and 1 Eben came along to assist in their journey. When the ship was all boarded, each astronaut went to their own individual pod and settled in for the long journey ahead.
Alright, before we get to, what they saw on that journey, let's have a little bit of fun here and talk about something that comes up more than you'd probably think when Project Serpo or just interactions between aliens and humans is discussed. Hybrids. Yeah, aliens creating human-alien hybrids, either through experimentation or, God forbid, actually getting it on. This kind of thing always feels like it's going down the same rabbit hole that creepy online fan fiction does, where it's like, I'm gonna write about my fantasy of Alf impregnating Willie Tanner. I don't know. I'm not trying to shame, live your lives, but the concept of humans and aliens breeding with each other always feels inherently silly to me. With that said though, this does often play into the Project Serpo conspiracy. Those astronauts were apparently on this planet for a while. Who knows who they met. One thing could have led to another. Plus, in all these reported UFO abduction cases, who knows what kind of nasty experiments those Greys could have been doing.
When the crew arrived at Serpo, the first thing they noticed was that it was barren, bright, and hot. Really hot. About 107 degrees Fahrenheit or 41 degrees Celsius. Quickly, they realized why. Planet Serpo had 2 suns, which are shown here in a photograph taken by one of the astronauts. Allegedly. One of the suns was orbited by Serpo, and the other was off in the distance. Because of this, the planet never got dark, and the days were 40 hours long, meaning that their decade-long mission was actually going to take 13 human years. In total, there are about 650,000 Ebens living on the planet in small, separate village communities and houses made of some kind of concrete rubber substance. It was a primitive life, but at the same time, the Ebens were equipped with electricity and incredibly advanced technology. Families generally consisted of a male and female Eben, and each family was allowed to have a maximum of 2 children, which were hidden away until they reached the age of maturity. During their time on Serpo, the astronauts gathered as much information about the Ebens as they could. And if you guys remember, I do believe I mentioned that one of the astronauts died on transit. Apparently the Ebens used that astronaut to clone and create hybrids of, like James mentioned. And it was then that the remaining astronauts realized that they weren't as peaceful as they once thought them to be. When it came time to return home, for some reason, 2 of the astronauts actually decided to stay, and then 2 more astronauts died on the way back to Earth. The surviving astronauts were given a large sum of money and an entirely new identity. That's great and all, but many of them were suffering from radiation poisoning due to the 2 suns and died soon after their return to Earth.
One of the most avid supporters of the Project Serpo conspiracy is a man named Richard Doty, who we can't really talk about Serpo without talking about this guy. See, Richard Doty has made some pretty outlandish claims, so outlandish that there's a whole other conspiracy that spawned around him and other government officials like him. Supposedly, Doty was the man behind those anonymous emails I talked about earlier. Richard Doty is a retired special agent who used to work for AFOSI, the United States Air Force Office of Special Investigation. But a lot of people think he wasn't actually investigating UFOs, but that he was part of a team spreading misinformation intentionally, basically muddying the waters and leaking supposedly secret info about the government's exchange program with alien beings in order to confuse the public, making it hard for us to tell what's real or not. Of course, the purpose behind the misinformation is, of course, to distract everyone from the actual nefarious things the government is up to. I mean, who doesn't get excited about aliens, right? I'm sure we'd all rather believe that the worst thing the government is doing is working with extraterrestrials instead of them doing some shady stuff at our own expense. Could there be some genuine truth about the planet Serpo thing? I mean, sure, maybe, but you know, just something to keep in mind with stuff like that. Honestly, what doesn't the Blue Planet Project cover?
We're talking short grays, tall whites, crossbreeding hybrids, and advanced intergalactic technologies and pharmaceuticals. Take it away, James.
So what is the Blue Planet Project? Well, the Blue Planet Project is a global movement dealing with the Earth's water crisis, but who cares about that? We're talking about another Blue Planet Project, a top secret document leaked by a supposed whistleblower from the US government, leaking info about decades of cooperation between the US military and alien forces right here on Earth. The document was never meant to be seen by the public, but in 1991, an anonymous author released it. It was filled with sketches, notes, diagrams about different alien species and their advanced technology. Then in 2014, more supposed secret information was released in a book entitled Blue Planet Project: An Inquiry into Alien Life Forms. This one contained lost chapters and was full of info that had been left out of the original release. Info we'll be diving into in more detail, but in general it contains stuff that's been leaked by a number of whistleblowers. There's actually more than one author. Their names are now known: Jefferson Souza and Gil Carlson, and apparently the bigwigs have not been happy. Ever since these books came out, there are 3 in total now, the United States government, NASA, and all those aliens working with them who thought they were being all sneaky have been absolutely pissed. The monkey wrench has been thrown, the secrets have been leaked, and now me and Hannah are here to kick them while they're down, and we're gonna mess up the global elite's plans even further with the help of all you fine subscribers, so let's get ready to rumble.
According to Blue Planet Project documents, there are 4 specific extraterrestrial races. Some you might have heard of before, and some you might have not. To ease us in, let's start with the most commonly known alien races, the Zeta Reticulans and the Reptilians. The first documented race are the Zeta Reticulans, aka the Greys. The Greys are your kind of stereotypical looking aliens, said to be humanoid beings with gray skin, large heads, and almond-shaped black eyes. They have slender bodies with elongated arms, legs, fingers, and toes, and their height ranges from 3 to 4 feet. The species is incredibly technologically advanced, they possess telepathic abilities, and are often associated with abductions and genetic experimentations due to their scientific interest in humanity. Next described are the Reptilians, humanoid beings with scaly skin, slitted eyes, and sometimes even tails. According to reports, these guys are often aggressive and manipulative. Not only that, but apparently many of them have already infiltrated society. I'm talking the government. That's right, the president is a lizard.
One of the subjects that's come up in the Blue Planet Project conspiracy is the existence of alien pharmaceuticals. Now that does not sound very good. These are exactly what they sound like, highly advanced medications or substances that extraterrestrial beings possess, far superior to anything developed here on Earth, capable of treating diseases, enhancing physical abilities, or even altering consciousness. And that's where things get gnarly because sure, we'd love to have quick cures to horrible illnesses, but I don't want to be swallowing pills covered in the grease stains by a race of reptilians. I want to control my dang brain on top of that, but that could be exactly what's going on. Aliens and the government working in unity to create highly addictive medications that keep us dumb, dependent, and delirious. But they may also be working on developing medications for humans that could help us endure long space flights, just like our space-faring pals. I don't want to come off too negative here, in case they're watching from their secret labs deep beneath the Denver airport.
Okay, now that we've covered Greys and Reptilians and gotten a little more information about the project from James, thank you James, let's talk about the remaining alien races discovered to date. We have the Nordics, the Mantis beings, and the Indistincts. Starting with the Nordics, or as you may know them, tall whites, which are tall, humanoid beings with fair or pale skin, light blonde hair, and blue or green eyes, along with an idealized muscular physique. The Nordics are benevolent and spiritually advanced, with a goal to push humanity towards enlightenment and peace. And then there are the Mantis beings. Insectoid, mantis-like creatures with long, slender bodies equipped with a human head and torso, large, compound insect eyes, and sectioned little insect limbs. Like the Nordics, Mantis beings are considered spiritual beings with access to higher dimensional realms than our own. According to the documents laid out by the Blue Planet Project, there are also other variations of the 4 species, likely due to cross-coital interactions between them, as well as completely separate, indistinguishable alien beings with appearances and motives that humans are just not yet able to conceptualize. So don't even bother thinking about it because you can't. Your brain won't, you don't have that ability.
MAGI, the Majority Agency for Joint Intelligence, is a powerful government organization that controls a number of secretive projects, all detailed in the Blue Planet Project books. The projects are called Sigma, Sigma being the project which first made contact with aliens and continues to do so to this day. Plato, which is responsible for diplomatic relations with aliens. The US government apparently agreed to keep their presence secret in exchange for their technology. They also agreed to allow them to abduct humans and animals for experiments. The Aquarius Project was responsible for compiling the history of aliens on Earth and their interactions with humans, which apparently goes back thousands and thousands of years. The list just goes on and on, with multiple secret government projects all under this MJ-12 umbrella, all with specific jobs and tasks centered around dealing with the presence of aliens on Earth.
Remember how I mentioned the Zeta Reticulan scientific curiosity and how they are pretty much responsible for 99.9% of all abduction cases that we talk about on Earth? Well, let's dive a little deeper down that rabbit hole and talk about what exactly that process looks like according to documents connected to the Blue Planet Project. The abduction part itself is pretty murky, as most people who experience alien abductions often have lapses in their memory, the most common lapse taking place between the abduction and the release portion of the experience. What is generally remembered, however, are the lights, generally strange bright lights in the sky, and the sounds, generally pulsating low-pitched vibrational ones. And then of course there are the experiments. Human experiments performed by the Zetas. These include physical exams, reproductive exams that include the extraction of genetic material, and neurological tests, which generally involve brain scans and probing. Those who have gone through the process and lived generally experience trauma, PTSD, and memory loss, which, in case you forgot, I already mentioned.
Alright, so we got greys, reptilians, disgusting mantis people, and gorgeous Nordic aliens apparently that the US government has been aware of and even working with for decades. But what does this all mean for us? Well, there's all kinds of directions or things like this can go, but we can essentially boil it down to two: bad and good. If you're a glass half full kind of person, you might see some benefit to aliens and humans working together. In fact, I might even actually have more faith in extraterrestrials setting out to help humanity than our own governments. Take those supposed alien pharmaceuticals, for example. I mean, they could revolutionize medicine. On the flip side, they might just be revolutionizing the government's ability to control us. Then there's the alien tech. The book talks about advanced spacecraft and alien propulsion systems. If we learned to use this technology, space travel would become as common as flying on planes. We might even be able to explore other planets and possibly find new places to live. But on the other hand, there's the potential for some pretty dark implications.
I've got an implication for you. The implication that one day we will all become hybrid, crossbred versions of the aliens I described just a few points ago. Probably the Zetas, aka the Greys. Remember how I said that generally experiments will include reproductive examination with a biological material extraction component? Well, if you're wondering what they could possibly be using that material for, wonder no more. Zeta Reticuli is the name. Hybridizing and crossbreeding is the game. Apparently, and according to the Blue Planet Project, Zetas have been using human DNA to create gray human hybrids for quite some time now, and many people who have been abducted claim to have actually encountered these human-alien hybrids while aboard the Zeta spacecrafts. It is theorized that the practice is one of advancement and self-preservation. Simply put, the Greys engage in crossbreeding to ensure the longevity of their civilization and, I don't know, maybe make themselves a little bit taller. They max out at 4 feet. But if they wanted to try crossbreeding with a human, they could have just put out an ad on Craigslist. I'm sure there's like 100 guys who would gladly jump at the chance to jump on a Grey. They really don't need to be doing all that.
Of course, this conspiracy ties into a whole bunch of conspiracies dealing with aliens, including, of course, the fact that the government could be covering them up. Area 51, Bob Lazar, Dulce Base, cases of UFOs being spotted by mass amounts of people, only for the cases to mysteriously go cold. Many conspiracy theorists and even just the general public who's not even super into this sort of thing can probably agree that the government keeps a lot of things under wraps. And what bigger secret could there be than the presence of alien life right here on Earth? Why this book ain't all over the news, plastered on every street corner, being talked about on every podcast seeking the truth is beyond me. I can understand not being super surprised about Greys in cahoots with the government. I mean, they're boring, but mantis beings? Everyone needs to be made aware of this immediately. Which is why we're here with you right now.
I mean, it makes sense why the government is doing their absolute best to cover up the existence of multiple alien races making their way across the universe. How else would they be able to secretly reap the benefits of the advanced extraterrestrial technology? I know you touched upon it briefly, but let's get into it a little bit more. I'm talking specifically about the technologies used in alien spacecraft. You guys might recall a video James and I did a while back talking about the one and only Bob Lazar, who James also just mentioned, who claimed that the government was using Area 51 to reverse engineer a spacecraft that ran on moscovium, a highly unstable and radioactive element that has only ever been produced in a lab. On Earth, at least. Well, according to the Blue Planet Project, that guy was telling the truth. The documents also claim that the military has used alien technology to create anti-gravity devices and to unlock the secrets of faster-than-light space travel. Not only that, but aliens have also provided us with exotic matter reactors and metal materials that can be trained to shapeshift in various environments. Imagine going to sleep one day and your laptop's a laptop and you wake up and it's like, I don't know, a statue of a bear or something?